"My mom didn't forget me," the little girl said to no one in particular. "She just never came back. She wasn't crying." That was the part that broke him. Declan Morrow had pulled into the rest stop outside South Thunder Bay at 2:14 in the morning because his coffee had gone cold 40 minutes ago and he needed a stretch. He was supposed to be in Winnipeg by dawn. He had 3 men waiting on him, a shipment that couldn't be late, and a reputation built on the fact that Declan Morrow was never, ever late. And then he saw her. She was sitting on the concrete barrier at the edge of the parking lot, right where the floodlights ended and the darkness of the highway began. 7 years old, maybe 8, red jacket, one shoe untied, a purple backpack with a cartoon rabbit on it sitting beside her like a loyal dog. He almost kept walking. He told himself that later, when he was trying to understand what had happened to him that night. He almost kept walking, because Declan Morrow did not stop for strangers. Declan Morrow did not get involved. Declan Morrow had survived 41 years by understanding exactly where his business ended and where everybody else's began. But the girl wasn't crying. She was just sitting there in the dark with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring out at the highway like she was watching for something she already knew wasn't coming. And something about that stillness, that awful, too old stillness, made him stop walking. "Hey," he said. She looked up at him. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him with these enormous gray eyes and said, "Hi, you okay? I'm waiting." "For who?" She looked back at the highway. "My mom said she'd come back. She went to get something from the car." The girl paused. "But that was a long time ago." Declan looked at the parking lot. He looked at the road. He looked at the girl. How long ago? Before it got dark. It was 2:14 in the morning. He crouched down in front of her so they were eye level. Up close, he could see she'd been sitting long enough that there were creases on the backs of her thighs from the concrete. Her lips were pale. Her hands were cold. He could see it just from how white her knuckles were where she gripped her own arms. "What's your name?" "Harlow, Harlow." "Okay. I'm Declan." He kept his voice even, the way he kept his voice even in rooms where men were pointing guns at each other. Calm wasn't kindness. It was just strategy. "Harlow, is there anybody else here with you? Anybody you know?" She shook her head. "Did your mom say where she was going before she left?" "She said she forgot something in the car." Harlow looked down at her shoe, at the lace dragging on the ground, and didn't reach for it. "But we didn't drive here. We took the bus." The sentence landed in the middle of Declan's chest like a stone dropped into still water. They had taken the bus. There was no car. The girl had been sitting here for hours, waiting on a story that had never been true, and she had not cried, and she had not gone looking for help, and she had just sat in the dark waiting because her mother had told her to wait, and some part of her was still holding on to that. Declan Morrow stood up. He reached into his pocket and took out his phone. He did not call his men in Winnipeg. He called 911. Now here's what you need to understand about Declan Morrow, because nothing that happens next makes any sense without it. He was not a good man. He had not been a good man for a very long time, if he ever had been one to begin with. He ran the kind of operation that polite people pretended didn't exist in cities like Thunder Bay and Winnipeg and Sudbury. The kind of operation that moved things that shouldn't be moved, that settled debts that couldn't be settled in courtrooms, that kept a specific kind of order in specific kinds of places by being the most dangerous thing in the room. He had men who answered to him, and men who feared him, and men who had learned the hard way that those two categories were not always different. He was not the kind of man who stopped for little girls in rest, stopped parking lots at 2 in the morning. He was not the kind of man who waited 45 minutes for the OPP to show up, hands in his pockets, standing close enough that the girl wouldn't feel alone but far enough away that he wasn't crowding her. He was not the kind of man who, when Harlow finally did start to cry, quietly, carefully, like she was trying to do it in a way that wouldn't bother anyone, crouched back down and said, "Hey, look at me. You're not alone, okay? I'm right here." He was not that man. But that night, on the side of the highway outside Thunder Bay, he was. The OPP officer who arrived was a young woman named Sergeant Bridget Okafor, and she had the look of someone who had seen too much and slept too little and was still, somehow, managing to be decent about it. She took in the scene quickly, the girl, the man, the purple backpack, and her eyes settled on Declan with a question she hadn't asked yet. "She's been here since before dark," Declan said. "Mother told her she was going to the car. They took the bus." He kept his voice flat. "There's no car." Bridget looked at Harlow. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Bridget. Are you cold?" Harlow looked at her and then looked at Declan, checking. He nodded, just barely. "A little," Harlow said. Bridget pulled a blanket out of the back of the cruiser, the kind of blanket that police always have that looks like it's been through 1,000 situations worse than this one, and wrapped it around Harlow's shoulders. Then she turned back to Declan. "And you are?" "Someone who stopped." She studied him. "Name?" "Declan Morrow." Something shifted in her face. Not fear exactly. Recognition. She'd heard the name before and she knew what it meant, and to her credit she didn't let it change how she was standing. "You were just passing through?" "Thunder Bay to Winnipeg. Stopped for coffee." Bridget glanced at the rest stop building, then back at him. "You stayed." "She wasn't crying," Declan said. Which wasn't an explanation, and both of them knew it. Bridget held his gaze for another moment and then seemed to make a decision. She turned back to Harlow and knelt down. "Harlow, can you tell me your last name?" "Slade." "Harlow Slade." "And your mom, what's her name?" "Tanya." The girl's voice was small. "Tanya Slade." "Okay. We're going to find her, all right?" Bridget said it with the particular firmness that meant she was making a promise she intended to keep regardless of what it cost her. "We're going to figure this out tonight." Harlow looked at the blanket. "She didn't forget me," she said. "I know she didn't forget me. She needed to go. She does that sometimes. She goes away for a while and then she comes back." "Nobody said anything. She always comes back," Harlow said. Declan looked away out at the highway at the dark line of trees against the gray sky. He thought about his own mother, briefly, the way you think about a door that's been nailed shut for a long time. He thought about what it meant to be 7 years old and have already learned to explain away the people who were supposed to stay. "I'll wait," he told Bridget, "until she's settled, if that's all right." Bridget looked at him again with that unreadable expression. "You don't have to do that. I know." What they found out over the next hour and a half was this. Tanya Slade was 26 years old and had been battling an addiction to opioids for the better part of 3 years. She was not a bad person. That was what Bridget told Declan quietly, standing 10 feet from where Harlow was sitting in the back of the cruiser with the door open, drinking hot chocolate from the rest stop vending machine. She was not a bad person. She was a person who was very, very sick and who had been running out of ways to manage it. And tonight, at a rest stop outside Thunder Bay, something had finally broken. They found Tanya Slade 3 hours later in the trees behind the rest stop. She was alive. She was not okay, but she was alive, and the paramedics who arrived with the second cruiser were people who had seen this before and knew what to do with it. Harlow, from the back seat of the cruiser, watched the paramedics work without saying a word. Declan stood beside the car and watched Harlow watch them. He thought, she's been doing this for a long time, holding herself together, making herself small, explaining away the thing that hurts the most because it's the only way to survive it. He thought, how long does a kid do that before it stops working? She your daughter? Bridget appeared beside him. No, but you know her now. Declan didn't answer that. Children's aid was coming from Thunder Bay. It would take another hour at least. Bridget asked Harlow if she was hungry, and Harlow said she wasn't. And then 3 minutes later she said, quietly, maybe a little. Bridget came back with chips and a granola bar and a second hot chocolate, and Harlow ate all of it with the focused efficiency of someone who'd learned not to be picky about when food was available. At some point Harlow looked up at Declan and said, "You're still here." "Yeah, you were supposed to go to Winnipeg." He blinked. He hadn't told her that. She must have heard him on the phone, back at the beginning, when he'd been calling to say he'd be late. "That's right. Why didn't you go?" He thought about the answer for a moment. Didn't seem right to leave. Harlow looked at him with those gray eyes. "My teacher says people are basically good," she said. "Most people." She paused. "I wasn't sure if that was true. What do you think now?" She considered it seriously, the way kids do when they're actually thinking about something instead of just answering to be polite. "I think maybe some people are good in places you don't expect." Declan Morrow, who had buried 2 men this year and would not be losing sleep about it, felt something move in his chest that he had no name for. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe." The children's aid worker arrived at 4:47 in the morning. Her name was Patricia Holt, early 50s, sensible shoes, the kind of steady competence that you only got from doing hard work for a long time and choosing to keep showing up anyway. She took Harlow's file from Bridget, crouched down, introduced herself, and told Harlow in a clear and honest voice exactly what was going to happen next. "Your mom is going to the hospital," she said. "She needs help right now, and the doctors are going to help her. And you're going to come with me tonight, and we're going to get you somewhere safe and warm. Okay?" Harlow listened to all of this without looking away. "Will my mom know where I am?" "Yes. As soon as she's able to receive information, she'll know exactly where you are." "Okay." Harlow picked up her purple backpack. She looked at Declan one more time. "Thank you for staying," she said. "You didn't have to." "I know." She nodded, like that was the right answer, like the fact that he hadn't had to made the staying matter more. Then she took Patricia Holt's hand and walked toward the car. Declan watched her go. He stood in the parking lot of a highway rest stop at 4:51 in the morning, watching a 7-year-old girl with a purple backpack and one untied shoe get into a stranger's car because that was the safest option available to her, and something in him went very quiet. He made it to Winnipeg by 8. His men were there, and the shipment was there, and everything proceeded the way it was supposed to proceed. If anyone noticed that Declan Morrow was quieter than usual, they knew better than to mention it. The business got done. It always got done. But 3 days later, Declan was back in Thunder Bay. He told himself it was for other reasons. He had contacts there. He had business. The city was a node in a network that required maintenance like any other. He called Bridget Okafor from a payphone. He still used payphones, occasionally, out of habit, and he said the girl. "Harlow Slade. Is she all right?" A pause. "Why are you asking?" "Because I want to know." Another pause, longer. He could hear Bridget weighing something. "She's in a good foster placement," she said finally. "Thunder Bay, family's been doing this for 8 years. She's okay. And the mother? Detox, then treatment. She's trying." "Good." He paused. "That's good." He hung up. He went to the courthouse because he knew how these things worked, and he knew which levers existed, and he had enough money and enough quiet influence to move things without leaving fingerprints. He didn't do it himself. He never did anything himself that could be traced. But a very good family lawyer in Thunder Bay received an anonymous referral that directed her attention to one Harlow Slade, currently in foster care, and one Tanya Slade, currently in treatment, and suggested that if anyone wanted to ensure that the reunification process went smoothly, and that Tanya had access to the best possible long-term support, there were resources available. The lawyer's name was Constance Wu. She was sharp and careful, and she didn't ask questions she didn't want answers to. She called the number she'd been given and said, "This is going to take time, treatment, stability. The courts will want to see at least a year of demonstrated progress before they'll consider full reunification." "A year," said the voice on the other end. "At minimum, fine," said the voice. "Make sure she has what she needs. And the child too." Constance Wu wrote down her notes and did not write down the name of the person she'd spoken to, because she was a good lawyer and she understood which details were important. She would spend the next 14 months working on Tanya Slade's case with a thoroughness that surprised even her colleagues, and she would never fully be able to explain why it had become so important to her. 8 months after the night at the rest stop, Declan Morrow was sitting in a restaurant in Thunder Bay. A regular restaurant, the kind with booths and laminated menus and bad coffee that he ordered out of something like nostalgia, when a girl in a red jacket walked in with a foster family and sat 2 tables away. Harlow. She was taller. She'd got a haircut. She looked like a kid who'd been eating regular meals and sleeping regular hours, and it showed in her face. The color was back. The awful stillness was gone, replaced with the ordinary restlessness of a child who wanted to be somewhere else. She didn't see him. He paid his bill and was almost at the door when she looked up. The recognition hit her face the way it sometimes does with kids. Not gradual, but instant total. "Declan," she said. He stopped. He turned around. "Hey, Harlow." She looked at him for a long moment. The foster mother, a warm, solid woman in her 50s, who had the look of someone who'd seen a great many things and remained standing, glanced between them with careful eyes. "You're here," Harlow said. "I'm here. Do you live here?" "Sometimes." She accepted this with the equanimity of a child who'd learned that adults often gave you answers like that, and it was usually best to work with what you had. "My mom's doing better," she said. "She calls me on Sundays." Yeah. Harlow looked down at the table, then back up. "She doesn't always. Sometimes she forgets. But she's trying." A pause. "Patricia says that counts." "Patricia's right, I know." Harlow said it like she'd spent a lot of time deciding to believe it. "I just have to keep knowing it." Declan stood in the middle of a restaurant in Thunder Bay, in the middle of a Tuesday morning, holding his coat, and he thought about a girl sitting in the dark with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at a highway, waiting on something that was never going to come back. He thought about what it took to still be waiting, kindly, 8 months later. He thought about the specific and unearned grace of a child who had every reason to close her heart and had, somehow, refused to. "Keep knowing it," he said. "That's the whole thing, really." Harlow nodded like she was filing that away. He walked out into the cold Thunder Bay morning and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking at the clouds stacking up gray and heavy over the lake. Then he called Constance Wu. "How are things?" he asked. "Moving," she said. "Tanya Slater had a strong review last month. Another 6 months. They might talk about supervised visits." "Good." He watched a bus pass. "Keep going, you know," Constance said carefully. "Whoever you're doing this for, it's making a difference. Real difference." He didn't answer that. He put the phone away and walked down the street, past the coffee shops and the law offices, and the people who knew his name, and the people who were glad they didn't. And he thought about a sentence he hadn't said out loud in a very long time. Some people are good in places you don't expect. He didn't know if he was one of them. He suspected he was not exactly, not in any clean or uncomplicated way. The ledger he was carrying was heavy, and the accounting had a long way to go. But sometimes, on a night when the highway was dark and the coffee was cold, and a kid was sitting alone in a place she shouldn't have been, you stopped. And sometimes stopping was the whole thing. And sometimes the most unexpected promise is the one that gets kept. If Harlow Slade's story stayed with you, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from tonight. And if you believe that the right person can show up in the wrong place at exactly the right moment, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find stories like this one. We'll see you in the next one.